Isolation is something everyone has experience with, doubly so with the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Most people probably started to feel it taking a toll on their mental health, feeling depression/anxiety among other feelings. These feelings are no stranger to the modern man. We have felt isolation for thousands of decades. We don't have to go far back in time to find signs of it. There's always been less contact with other humans in a society where everyone has their own life and job and their own friends and family. The greater distance you are from other humans, the more socially isolated you feel. Whether it's the wilderness or how the majority of us connect to our phones and internet, we're socially disconnected as a whole. The parallels between lack of context, forceful in cases of alienation or otherwise, is clear. Without a sound mind, living alone for an extended period of time will cause poor mental health, and in some cases physical. The need to be social is deeply rooted in our very being, and we may think we're special, but in reality we're isolating ourselves from the world. This comes from things like parasocial relationships on the internet, living vicariously through people you see, among others. This is certainly not the same for everyone, but spending hours on social media contributes to this. So when you are alienated for looking like a monster, empathy becomes hard, especially when it's the only thing you've known. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley was published in 1818. It is told through a variety of points of view and follows the story of a young scientist named Victor Frankenstein, who through scientific discovery creates an 8-foot-tall monster that gains sentience. Through his quote-unquote sentience, one avenue of the human condition it explores is that of alienation. This is prominent throughout the book, and is one of the main ways the monster lives in the world, alone. Isolation breeds violence and depression because social interaction is necessary for humans to live. The best example of this is through the monster itself. The monster separates from Victor, his creator, at an early point in the book, and an early point in the monster's development.
So the monster starts off on its own, and in fact, it doesn't want to isolate from people, but in contrast, people want to isolate from it. The creature in fact just wants love from people, but shortly realizes that he will never receive it. This stems even from the very beginning of the book, when the monster opens its eyes at Victor. Victor immediately runs away saying, "Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I ravaged incessantly concerning him." In a sense, the creature was birthed into isolation and was left alone to figure out how to live in the world. From the lab, the creature makes its way to the village nearby. I proceeded across the fields for several hours until at sunset I arrived at the village. How miraculous did this appear! The huts, the neater cottages, the stately houses, engaged in my admirations by turns. This shows the excitement in the creature's mind at the thought of seeing people, but when trying to greet the townsfolk, the creature immediately is met with hostility. I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until I grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons. I escaped to the open country, and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite bare, and making a wretched appearance after the places I had beheld in the village. This marks the second time the creature is met with hostility, and being broken down physically and mentally, it takes refuge in the broken down shack, meaning it not only feels like an outcast, but completely rejected from society. These encounters the creature to declare war on humans. It says, "There is none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me, and should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment I declared an everlasting war against the species, and more than all against who had formed me and set forth into this insupportable misery. It had just responded with what it was met with from other humans, which is violence. Using violence to cope with a harsh response by that are supposed to be one's own will leave anyone confused and out by fighting. So all of these examples put the creature's suffering into perspective. As a last resort, the creature demands Victor to make it a female companion. being so lonely that it threatens Victor. It says, I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from the world, but on that account we shall find more attached to one another. Victor tries, but gives up and tears the woman's creature up before she's finished. The creature responds with an ever-present action in his life, violence, and it kills Victor's wife Elizabeth. All of this shows the power of being included. The creature begins with the docile, non-confrontational, but when it's met with hostility and hate, the creature does one thing that anyone would do. It responds with violence. The creature is not the only character Shelley explores isolation with. Another being Walton, who in contrast chooses himself to isolate. He sets sail on a voyage, but at the same time longs for companionship. He is the common ground between Victor, who is isolated completely on purpose, and the monster, who wants nothing more to be integrated into society. However, Walton is more of a sound mind, and he chooses to abandon the journey when he finds it dangerous enough. His childhood was similar to that of Victor's, in that he taught himself from a young age. Even his childhood shows isolation and loneliness as signs of self-sufficiency and preservation. Lastly, the character with the much experience in isolation is the titular Victor Frankenstein. He is a man of science and will not stop at anything to complete his goals. Perhaps this clouds his judgment as a person, and he causes some problems down the line when interacting with the monster. Victor chooses to set up his laboratory in a solid chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, in Ingolstadt, as a replacement for the school's laboratory he was once using. It is a self-imposed alienation he chooses due to the fact of his scientific experiments. At first he alienated because of the creation of the monster, but slowly turns into alienation from keeping the secret of the monster. Victor says, I must absent myself from all I loved while thus employed. Once commenced, it shall be quickly achieved, and I might restore to my peace and happiness. This shows Victor's self-imposed need to discover something, and it had gotten to the point where he would no longer see or speak to his family until he did. More proof Victor appears to be of an unsound mind. These characters in the book are not real. However, as humans we can see the effects of isolation in ourselves, our friends, our family. When met with complete isolation and alienation, mankind and society as a whole shapes us from a creature to a monster.